Okay, good morning. Very warm welcome to the session. Today we will discuss the last block of DCE-05, which is writing poetry. And the issue that we will be discussing today is the language rhyme. So, in this particular discussion, in this particular issue, we will, ponder our attention to diction, colloquialism, material structure and innovation. So these four subtopics are there. That is block 4 of DCE-05, writing poetry, and today we have the language and rhyme in our discussion. Dear learners, as you remember, we yesterday in the afternoon session, we discussed block 3, which was imagery and symbol. So it was a very important area of writing poetry because we all know that whatever experiences, whatever impressions comes to the mind of the poet, those get accumulated, and there is a kind of image which is in the conscious mind or consciousness of the poet. So it takes a shape of image, then it is voiced through the persona and through the appropriate words, right words, I should be saying. Then it comes to the relationship with the outside world, whereby it reaches the readers or the listeners or the viewers, and then the viewers are able to relate it to. So in outside world, it gets related to the symbols. So as I mentioned yesterday, the image is the fluid kind of impression of experiences in the mind of the poet, in the consciousness or the conscious mind of the poet. But the symbols are concrete worldly objects which exist in the outside world. So there is a relationship between image and the symbol. So the process of imaging is imagery. So second point we discussed yesterday was the first we discussed the symbols. Those are, as I mentioned, the outside world and concrete objects like flower, like stone, like sea, like a river, like forest, like tree, like birds, and so forth, like deer. So we also come across about symbolic and symbolism because symbolic is something which represents some image, and symbolism is a process of it's a ritual which makes the image related or meaningful with the help of the symbol. So this whole process is the symbolism. Uh, then we came to the point of image. So image is basically it's it's a fluid kind of state of idea or impressions that gets into the mind of the poet, and then these have a kind of universal approach. Means when they are stated, when the image is created, then it is not it's verbal and non-verbal. That means sometimes we create image through our words, but most often it is the state where it is not yet gained the state of verbal. That means it is not voiced yet. So sometimes imagery and themes, they are sometimes treated as equal, but uh, in, in fact, the imagery is theme is that what gives rise to impressions, and out of those impressions, the imagery, the process of image is completed. And then there is a role for the language which is assigned to the image, because image has to be represented and it has to come out. Like the word wolf. Now, wolf creates an image in our minds. But if we say he is a wolf, he is a wolf. So that means he is a person. How can a person be wolf? So wolf is in fact both image and the symbol. A symbol in the outside world who represents cruelty and violence and unkindness. So it creates an image of a person who is not kind enough. So this image represents the that kind of a person who is unkind, who is violent, who is no, not very passionate. But by stating somebody wolf, we relate that person whose image is there in the poet's mind with the outside concrete example, that is the animal wolf, known for its cruelty, violent behavior, unkindness, and all sorts of uh, uh, bad things that are attached to the wolf. The third important aspect that we discussed yesterday, that was metaphor in poetry. So it is said that metaphor in poetry is just like flour to bread. So if there is no flour, means there is no atta, then there won't be any bread. So it is just like to the poetry, if there is no metaphor, there is very least possibility of the poetry. So metaphor is in the center stage. Metaphors. There are traditional metaphors. There are modern metaphors, because there may be single metaphor. There may be multiple metaphors. So the entire imagery revolves around sometimes around single metaphor where there is a central character, and the entire poetry revolves around the entire representation of the peripheral ideas revolves around the central metaphor. Sometimes we have more than one metaphors where, like example was given by Shiv Kumar K's poetry, where they were talking about women. The woman was, alone in the house. There were sounds of ghosts. Then there were other characters like some animal, etc. So altogether, it is it's in the composition of the multiple metaphors. There are multiple characters, we can say, those which come into the scene. Then we also discussed like cliches. What are the cliches? Cliches are kind of stereotypes. Sometimes we use such narrations which is precast or the often repeated. So these often repeated words or stanzas are not desired in the poetry. Of course, some acclaimed poets do use it, but very cautiously. As a beginner in the writing poetry, perhaps it is advisable that cliches are avoided, because cliches a kind of blockades to the poetry, where the cliches are used, the flow suddenly comes to an end and almost the poem ends there. So that perhaps is not desired. So it is advised that cliches are not used by particularly by the budding poets, budding authors who wish to be there in the poetic world. So this is what we discussed yesterday. Today we have a point to discuss, that is language, rhyme. So we all know that language and rhyme. Language, these are two areas. Rhyme is the metrical order, of the poetry, or in particular poem. There we take care of the repetition of certain words, certain letters, and metrical idea is to repeat them in certain periodicity. So the periodicity is there, repetition is there, uh, and likewise the use of specific letters, because there are meters, so there are accented and unaccented letters. Sometimes the certain, like thous, THOUST. So here ST is not accented. So sometimes it is accented, sometimes it is unaccented. So this is the function of rhyme, because it follows meter. Then there is a periodicity, there is a repetition, and there is a occurrence and a reoccurrence. So some letters occur at you know at designed pace, or designed frequency, and they are repeated, and the rhyme or the rhythm is brought into through these through the use of these letters at a certain uh, period, at certain I mean, what we can say, frequency. So we come to the first part of the title of the unit, which is diction. So because language and rhyme is these are two issues which we will discuss in the entire 4 units. But if we can begin with the language. So what is language? Language is a tool to express the ideas, emotions, and achievements. Because human beings are social animals, so they love to share their ideas, and to express those ideas, language is means. So language is a tool or means of expression. So that means language is almost central to everything. So perhaps in certain other discussion or sessions we might come to that. But if you look at the initial goal of the language, it is means of expression. So, since it is means of expression, uh, it is related to the human mind. How does one express? So if I am saying how does one express, that means it is an individual. How does one express? So an individual express it through his or her own style, tone, and tenor. So this is very important. The language is a very, very important aspect of uh, writing poetry, because there the poet mind is expressed through, as we discussed in the previous sessions. But what is expressed, that is poet's mind, unity of impression that exists as in image in the poet's consciousness or the poet's mind, that is expressed. It is very important that we understand the uh, importance of language. The language is also individual's propriety as to how to use it. So this decision of using the language in a particular set of words and style is what is called diction. I've heard this term quite often. We say his diction, he has very particular diction. His diction is almost as of the acclaimed author. So, what do we mean by diction? So, uh, you
हाँ
know,
जी.
description of the diction is it is a writer's particular choice of words and style. So the choice is especially difficult in poetry where words often take an additional meaning depending upon the context. Now this is very important aspect. First of all, diction is the sole property of the author who takes a particular choice of words and style to express his her mind. Now, the problem, this choice is in a way, yes, of course, the poet has said something, but whether the poet is able to reach the audience or the listeners, how the or the readers. Reason being that the words, in poetry, the words takes different or additional meaning depending upon the context. Say, for example, if we are having this class and somebody arrives maybe half an hour late, and what I will say, or if I say, well, you are very early today. So what I'm trying to say, well, you are very early today. I have used this. This is my diction. So what I'm doing is I'm pointing out a different thing rather than exactly what my words are saying. So this is a diction. So this is very difficult, and English is a second language to us. So we are unable to reach its precise meaning. So it is very difficult to put the ideas precisely in a language in a manner that it is not distorted. So that is a challenge. So the way poet writes, it is the diction. But the problem with the diction is that whether that message which is being put through the style or the words or the diction of the author, whether that reaches. Reason being that we are not that way innately trained in the English language, which is to some extent is the second language or the language that we acquired. So this is one challenge. Now the problem is that a poem is very difficult, to be broken into fragments or the language or the rhythm. So if we do that, then the we lose the meaning because the way a poet has created a stanza, then that stanza reflects his diction and his particular strategy to put the meaning into that particular stanza. So it is very difficult to break it in the middle and then decide that we will take meaning out of it. That won't happen. Reason being, it is the propriety of the author as to how to create a stanza, create a set of sentences, and then build the meaning into it. So the problem is that semantics is not fully able to control the use of language. That means the strategy of finding a meaning is different from the innate ability of the poet who is independent, who has his or her own diction and choice of words used and the style, how one would put this across. So this is a big challenge. Uh, so we have to see that budding poet take due care in putting his or her own ideas to the best ability so that whatever message, whatever intention has been expressed in that stanza, in that set of lines or set of stanzas, reaches the listener, reaches the audience or the readers. I explained to you that the language of the poetry uh, is used in a particular manner by the poet in his or her own style. As I also added here that English is a second language, which is an acquired language, and sometimes we take it for granted that its grammatical structure is enough to bring about the meaning or reach to the meaning. But the problem is that doesn't happen with the poet or the poem. With the poetry sometimes goes beyond the physicality of the words, and it adds new meaning to it. So one has to be very careful about how to derive out the meaning of from the poetry or the poem. What has to be done by the author? The author should understand the importance of clarity. That means it should not only that it should be lucid or it should be intelligible, but it has also to be portrayed in such a way that the obscurity is not there, and the unclear lines are not added to the poetry or to the poem, and the impulses to indulge in the complexities in expression is avoided. uh, some poets do that because if they are master of the language, they can indulge in the complexity of expressions through their jugglery of words, but that is not the case with the budding poet. So it is good to write a poem that is clear, that is easy to understand, because that will only reach the readers. So, there's a famous quote or advice by T.S. Eliot. So, Eliot says, "Portrait must not stray too far from the ordinary." This is a very interesting statement. Poetry must not stray too far from the ordinary. What does it mean? It is a very important statement. From what the poetry should not stray from the ordinary everyday language which we use and hear. This is very clear message. What should be the language of the poetry? It should be the language which is used in everyday life or living circle by us. So what we hear. That means it shouldn't be a very journalistic language. It shouldn't be full of cliches. It shouldn't be a grammatically very acclaimed language. But on the contrary, it has to be ordinary, everyday language, and the language which we use in our day-to-day affairs, and also we listen to or hear the kind of use of language. So what I'm trying to put across here is that the language of the poetry must be it has to be a lucid one, but at the same time it has to be very clear. And what clarity means in, in relation to poetry, it should be in the language diction which is common to a particular society, common to the audience or the readers. Reason being, the language is one such important entity which behaves differently in poetry. That is the problem. In prose, you can perfectly style and structure your sentences, but that is not the case with the poetry. So, in poetry, it is little easier in the prose to stick to the grammatical rules, but in the poet does innately breaks the grammatical boundaries and then flows. That is what brings spontaneity to poetry. That what brings the element of impulsiveness, and it makes it more nearer to the heart of the readers. So it has the subtleness, it has the refinement, and it is slightly different from the spoken language. Uh, it is slightly different, and yet it is also nearer to the spoken language instead of the written prose. So the effort should be to convey uh, uh, the reader the exact meaning through the set of words, set of sentences, or the arrangement of stanza that is uh, used in everyday life, or that is heard in surroundings by the reader. So, sometimes how to do it. So the problem is that we tend to use very high-end words, sometimes very complex words. So instead of those complex words, there has to be words which are of common use, which are not very complex, like the words which are not very specific components of the language and the vocabulary, but something that that, that comes out spontaneously and build a rapport with the reader. That those kinds of words are required. But the problem with these kinds of words is that they are not easily to be found, or they are not found at the moment when they are required, or the situation for which such appropriate words are not often found. They can be found with the cumulativity of the author, or the ability of the author who has been experienced and writing poetry for a pretty long time, and also an avid reader. That is important. And so it's a kind of writing poetry is a kind of surrogate experience. That means you have to take the experiences, put them inside your own mind, and then try to find out as to whether they convey the same meaning as for which they were conceived, and then such words should be used. So sometimes these words are called second-hand words or second-hand experience. So that means these have been used before. So their use for the poetry is a kind of second-hand experience, second-hand use. But this requires, quite a good imaginative cultivation and training, because often we tend to create our own words, which are sometimes cliche, which are sometimes very complex. We do not agree to such, second-hand words or second-hand experiences. We do not accept others' experiences. That means we do not accept the diction, the words which belongs to others. But a good poet, takes them inside and then try to raise them in his or her own way, and then express his or her idea through these words. One very important concern with the language is that it is not the meaning is not confined to the linguistics strategy, that is semantics, or the science of meaning. So the science of meaning often sticks to the word meaning, uh, and it is not possible to give an ultimate assurance that the author's words will reach the reader in the same manner or will sound the same meaning as was encoded by the author. Why or how does it? It happens in some occasions, but not all the time. So there is a word power, or we use the term denotative meaning and the connotative meaning. So this denotation and connotation, these are two important aspects of the construction of meaning or the semantics. Sometimes what we say that precisely uh, gives or reaches the readers and express, and it makes it gives the same meaning as was encoded by the author or the poet. But sometimes we do not stick to that meaning and go to a meaning which is beyond the words. So that is the connotative meaning. So this connotation means we take the context into consideration. So when we get the referral meaning, means that is the denotative meaning or the referential meaning. But when we go to further explanation, further interpolation to find out a meaning which is not fully conveyed by the words or by the denotation, then there is a scope and there is a finding which we call the connotative meaning. So connotative meaning takes the context into mind and then expresses meaning which is beyond the denotation, which is beyond the reference which is given. So if you look at Kedarwala's poetry, I think you will get a lot of such good examples, particularly with regard to the poem which is Vignette 1, and that relates to the flow in the Ganges. So the Ganga flows swollen with hymns, leapers huddle along the causeways like stunned shrubs black with frost burns, a thin dwarf smeared blue with ash, spiked with beard, frosted with matted hair, crisp from their river path. Women drop swine in coconut shells, but no service flickers in the eyes of Palside, in the faces of the blind. The river is the voice in the desert of human lives. Now, what meaning do you get? The river is a voice in the desert of human lives. So it doesn't give the meaning if we stick to the denotation, means what is directed. But if you take into consideration as to what the river does, it brings life to the human beings. It brings it. It is the sole cause of life. Means the river gives water. The water gives helps to create or to uh, the agricultural process, and thereby the grains are grown, and then that gives life to the human beings. So in the desert of human lives means when it is not actually the desert, it is the vast phenomena of human beings. So the river gives life basically. The river is a voice, so that means the river is the sole cause of human lives. But if you look at Ganges, because Ganges flows through the religious places, so it is swollen with hymns. What do we mean by flows swollen with hymns? Means when it passes through the religious places, it carries a lot of chanting, lot of mantras which are sung by the devotees who are having uh, a holy bath around the banks of Ganges. So all this is conveyed when we take into consideration which are the places through which the Ganges or the river Ganga passes. So it is very important that we take into consideration the context where it is not making sense with its denotation, with its directed or denotated meaning, what it denotes. Sometimes, we often come across uses of language which is not making any sense. So then we say, no, I don't understand. What do you mean? So if I say, what do you mean? I'm sorry, I didn't understand. And the other person says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be, or I didn't mean, he doesn't, or she doesn't say, didn't mean that. So what is happening? What do you mean? Then there's a reply, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. So what are we trying to say if there is no context? So without context, sometimes the language fails. So there is a failure of meaning. It is not able to, create meaning. So in order to create meaning, there has to be some context, but an intelligent reader will again find some meaning out of this, because then he will go to the context of the poem and then construct the and probably the correct meaning, which is there substantiated by the context. But if it is the case with the ordinary reader who is not trained into reading the poetry, that will be difficult to understand. So this difficulty means it is a failure of meaning. Uh, since we are talking about the language in the poetry, what is the importance of the language in the poetry, perhaps we have to be a little careful about putting the right words. What is the explanation of the right word? What I do not mean that the words are not right. In fact, all the words are right. But when they be, so what do they mean? Why the word it has been used here, the right word? So by saying the word to be right is that when the word qualifies its meaning, that means it is suitable for apt meaning, and it qualifies for the purpose for which it is used. Say, for example, there is a stone, which is stone fruit, or we can say the stone water. So, what do we mean by the stone water? What do we mean by stone fruit? So, it doesn't qualify because nothing can be grown on the stone, or nothing can be, or water is not expected on the stone. So, it doesn't qualify that way. But uh, when we say wolf, then the word it qualifies itself for the purpose when we use it for a violent person, for a cruel person, for an unkind person. So there it is right. So if we say uh, stony bed, so then usually there is no bed on the stone, or there can't be bed of stones. But stony bed means hard bed. But this hard bed sense comes only when we use it in the right context, because then it qualifies. It doesn't qualify to be a rock or to be a stone, but it qualifies as a right word for the meaning that we are the meaning which is construed as hard or very difficult bed. So, and then we know that it is very important to avoid use cliches. We have already discussed that cliches are the words which are which are kind of taboos, which are kind of words which have been repeatedly used, and those are not used anymore. So we should avoid such words which have been often repeated, which are having the pre-qualified meaning. So that means they do not add any new meaning to the expressions, to the impressions that is being conveyed by the poet. So the cliches should be avoided. often we find these cliches used in the journalistic language, so that language is not very valid for the poetry or the used to be in the poems. So because we know that the words have their own cycle, and they are sometimes the mortality is attached to them, and then they are not, they fades their shine over the period of time. So then they should be avoided and not used. Uh, Interestingly, some words are such. We used to often use the word like brethren. You know, specifically when the community refers to their people of their community, a large number of people from within one community are referred to as brethrens. But this word is not used anymore. So that way, even the words like abide, it used to be used quite frequently. We have to abide by this. We have to abide by this. But today we don't use this word very much. We simply say we should follow. We should not follow. The word beware has also been mentioned as a cliche now, because this beware of something. So today it is not used much. One should be aware, not aware. So there are certain words which have lost their sheen, which have become faded over the period of time. So they should be avoided. So same is the case with the archaisms. So archaisms should also be avoided, so as the cliches, because in poetry particularly these create confusion, and the present readers perhaps might not appreciate their use. So budding poet perhaps can take a cue from this discussion, and they should not use cliches or the archaism words. So we will come to a small point of discussion. We know that there's a word which is linguistic ecology. The linguistic ecology is a term which is used by a number of English authors, like Shiv Kumar has used this term quite often in his discussion regarding the writing of poetry by the budding authors. That means the poem is written in a specific type of linguistic atmosphere. That means when we write poetry, then there has to be certain set of cohesiveness. There has to be certain creation of certain atmosphere, that adds meaning to the poem or to the poetry, and also it gets easily related to the other members of the readership or the readers community. So the linguistic ecology it denotes some the kind of environment where the the poet as well as the readers are on the same planet of use of language. So if the readers can easily understand, that means the poet understands the linguistic ecology of the readers. So the readers reading habits, readers learning habits, readers use of language, when it finds when it is the same kind of ecology is created within the writings of a particular poet, then it is easier that the readers will take appropriate meaning from the poetry. So this linguistic ecology is a term which refers to homogeneous environment in which the poetry is written, which is understandable, semantically useful for the readers. So that is one perhaps an important cue that as to how the poetry should be written. It should be written, as we mentioned, in the language which is in everyday use, not depending upon the the community of the readers. If one is writing for the English readership, it has to be different in terms of use of words, the structure of sentences or stanzas. But if it is for Indian English readers, it has to be different. It has to be in everyday use of life experience of life, the use of language that we speak or that we listen to of a particular readers community. It cannot be common to all types of readers that the same style is used. So this is there. We will have a small discussion on another aspect. This is colloquialism. Its use and abuse. So the colloquialism is one very important aspect of poetic expression. Often, when good poetry is written, it always finds the readers in its reach. So, how does that happen, or how does reader? Why the reader likes the poetry of particular author, particular poet? So the reason is that when, as we mentioned just now, the linguistic ecology, when there is a linguistic ecology that relates to the readers, when the readers find themselves at ease with the structure, with the usage of language, and they find it easy to comprehend, and they are able to take meaning out of it. All this is all this makes an environment which is appreciated, which is liked by the readers. So we come to the another aspect, which is the colloquialism. So first of all, I think it is very important that the nature of poetic expression is of what kind. Whether it is in the simple speech, or whether it is in complex, whether it is in direct speech or it is in indirect speech, or in what kind of speech it is encoded. So just a second. So colloquialism is one term which is which refers to the writing of the poetry, which is generally expressed or associated with the ideas, with the thought process of a particular community of readers. So if you look at this particular point, and if it meets the requirement of the kind of language used by the community of readers, so so that doesn't mean an abnormal sentiment, but that means that it is in the consonance with the use of language, use of ideology, use of structure of language, which is used in the day-to-day life of that particular uh, community of readers. So if it is colloquiality is established, colloquiality is the harnessing, or it is creating a poetry in an environment which is of that locale, which is of that particular community of readers. So if that can be achieved, definitely the poet will be successful, and his poetry will reach to the larger community of readers. Colloquiality is also very fascinating, because it uses the local idiom, local diction, and it creates a lot of appeal, which is essential for the poet. So, if the poet is able to handle the use of language in the in style in diction which is used by the community of readers for which he or she is writing, that would be a good achievement. And maybe if we use the words of Isra Pound, when one really thinks and feels, one stammers with simple speech. So that means when one really thinks and feels of what of the colloquialism, and one stammers with simple speech. So that means one use the simple speech, which is the speech, which is the speech of the speech community of the readers for which it is being written. So then it becomes worthwhile. It becomes real, and it has a feel of the readers for which it is written. So maybe usually poetry is either it is something. Poetry itself is the heightened expression of the human soul. So, but how do we make it heightened? How do we make it speech of the human soul? That is the challenge. So it has to be done by handling the proper use of the language. So if one can handle the language properly, then perhaps one can do that. But handling the language to give the extreme, to give the climax or the heightened expression, whereby human soul is fully satisfied and the pleasure and bliss is provided to it, it's a very challenging job to the budding poet. But one can do that. How can one do that? By using the linguistic ecology of the reader's community. So that is what is called the colloquiality or the colloquialism. So colloquialism is the writing of a poem that should be viewed without any preconceived notions about the poetry itself. That something is esoteric or perhaps transcendental. One cannot write poetry which is esoteric in the sense that it doesn't relate or it talks about some metaphysical issues. Those are transcendental issues. Those are not within the range of the readers community. So if one is fully aware and one is able to use the language in such a way that it can heighten the experience of the reader's mind and can travel with the readers through the writings, perhaps that is the best effort of the budding poet. So how that can happen? It can be there in the prose also. It can be in the poetry also. And the colloquial idiom basically operates on many levels. It can be on several levels. It may denote purely. Sometimes it is purely native. There are connotations which are very native to a particular community of readers. So if that kind of idiom is used, that will be the colloquial idiom, which operates on the native connotations or the native level. So, but sometimes there is a kind of different type of colloquialism, which is the in the subtleties of the context. So the subtlety of context is slightly towards the connotative meaning. So then it is not on the denotative meaning. So it has to be interpreted. So that is another level of idiom. If we use the idiom which is native to a particular speech community, and it doesn't require connotations or the reference to the context, but just simply to the denotation of the language use, then it is a native. But if it is, it requires an interpretation and needs to be taken to another context, that is to be connotativeness added to each, then it is the another level of colloquiality or the colloquial idiom. We can see it, many such examples, like there is a famous poem which is Goodbye Party for Miss Pushpa T.S. It is the Nissan as Skills poetry. Friends, our dear sisters departing for foreign in 2-3 days, and we are meeting today to wish her bon voyage. You are all knowing, friends, what sweetness is in Miss Pushpa. I don't mean only external sweetness, but internal sweetness. Miss Pushpa is smiling and smiling, even for no reason, but simply because she is feeling. Miss Pushpa is coming from very, very high family. Her father was a renowned advocate. I am not remembering now which place. So it's a very long set of poem. The last stanza is, now I ask other speakers to speak, and afterwards Miss Pushpa will do summing up. Look at the structure of the poem. It is written in a very, very simple format, perhaps more in a prose order, yet the choice of and the use of words, the use of sentence structure is such that it gives good shape of poetry. So the diction is very, very native to the poet as well as to the uh, readers community, because it is referred to the Indian community. So we can see that it is quite near, quite understandable to the larger community of readers. So that way it's a good example of the native colloquialism or the idiom which is prevailing in the local use. Sometimes if you use the different colloquiality or different colloquial idiom, for example in haiku, rainy months dripping on and on as I lie back, ah, old man memories. So this is a haiku style where it is the colloquial idiom is used slightly differently. So it is rainy month dripping on and on. So it is very intelligent use of the meter, which which is use of letters on a fixed periodicity. Those are being recurring. Those are being repeated. Rainy month dripping on and on as I lie back. Ah, old man's memories. So we can see this example, which is the different use of colloquial idiom. Sometimes there is abuse of the colloquialism, where it is a kind of using the authenticity to kind of a poem which is having a narrated experience. So it becomes more of narrative rather than a poem or a poetic creation. So it lacks the right choice of words or the style or the diction that we discussed initially in the beginning of this particular session. So, because today we are concluding the sessions little early, so I would like to, talk about the new experiments, that are being done with the poetry today. So these are the innovations, those are in the poetry. So first of all, it is important to discuss as to why there is need for innovations. why there are experiments with the poetry, because we are talking about the free verse poetry, we are talking about the experimental poetry, saying that there is a poetry without form, there is a poetry without content, and so forth. So we are saying there's a prose, there's a poetry which is like prose. So all these are experiments are being done with the poetry, and today we have a lot of innovations with the poetry, which are both in the form and the content. That means we are digressing. We are making a departure from the conventional form. We discussed the structure of the poetry in the discussion maybe yesterday or day before yesterday. Structure, how the poetry should find an appropriate theme, and then how does a poetry, how it should begin, how it should develop, and how it should reach the climax, and then what kind of end should be there with the poetry. So the innovation talks about the change or the experiment with form and content. That means the structure has been touched upon, and there has been efforts to bring to sway away or to move away from the conventional structure of the poetry or the poem. The second issue is that there has been extensive use of free verse poetry, which is not using any metrical arrangement. So it is in natural speech rhythms. So instead of a regular meter or the line length that we have already, that we know why conventional poetry is strictly in the metrical order, which has fixed lines or fixed length, and the use of letters, the use of words, the repetition of letters and words at fixed periods, or the periodicity of repetition or the recurrence of letters and the words. So that is not happening anymore. And the major departure from the conventional poetry is found in we are dropping the formal punctuation, capital letters, the rhyme schemes, and so forth. So we are not using in poetry the arrangements of grammatical order, that we put proper punctuation. We have removed the half periods, those are commas and the semicolons or semicolons, or the full stops, etc. That is not used in the poetry anymore. So that is a departure from the conventional style, and then no capital letters are being used, and the rhymic scheme has also been changed. So we are not sticking to that conventional order where there is a rhyme between first and fourth stanza, or first and third stanza, or third and fifth stanza, likewise. So there are a lot of other you know departures from the conventional style of poetry, and it is being termed as a new discovery or a notion of discovery in the composition of poetry. Some people are writing a kind of prose poem, that is an attempt to incorporate the elements of prose into the poetry. So all sorts of experiments are being done with the poetry, with the writing poetry, and today sometimes it is becoming difficult, to distinguish the poetry from the prose. So that is also happening. So in a way, it is a transition from the old poetic style to a new poetic style, which is having its own uh, kind of alteration of the experiences. So some would like to express their experiences in slightly different manner. They do not want it to be truncated or to be dictated by the metrical arrangements or the conventional style of form and the conventional type of contents, because today the selection of content is also very different. We are not sticking to all those old kind of that we talked about initially in the block in the block one, which is natural and landscapes, then sociological. So those were two major, and also initially we discussed the structure, and we found out where we can find the themes. So people are moving from the sociological. They are moving within the sociological. They are becoming more political rather than the normal issues related to human lives and their concerns. So today we are becoming more political. They are choosing the themes which are exploitative of certain uh, such notions. Those are having the political tinge or tone in them. So these are some kind of issues that are related to the innovations in poetry. So I think we have to go a little deeper as to why these are happening. So perhaps if you reflect upon the developments in the society, there has been a great deal of experiment in the poetry, particularly in the 20th century, and it is still happening in the 21st as well. Why these are happening? There has been very traditional poetry in 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. Why it has changed altogether in 20th century? So we know that there are huge changes in the life studies of mankind in the 19th century, and those have very specific results in 20th century. That means people have started to look life from different perspectives. Today, it is not looked upon as simple, but it is looked upon as figures, as a life patterns from the pragmatic point of view, as a life patterns which have been shaped differently. Family structure has changed as a result of the industrialization, as a result of liberalization, as a result of globalization. There is a change in the shape, form, objectives, reflective, the representation of the society, social relationships. New experiences are being added to life. So altogether, there has been, and then these have influenced the art of crafting poetry as well, because in writing also there has been a lot of changes. Writing styles have changed. So obviously, in the content and the form of poetry is also to change with the with the change in the society, with the change in the relationships, with the change in the with the cultural exchange of various communities across the nations. So the very first one change which is often seen is the free verse. So the free verse is also stated to be a liberated way of composing poetry or writing poetry, because the rejection of traditional and classical verse form and the mythical patterns has been seen uh, as a step towards a step of progression in the poetry by certain quarters. Not everybody, not all the poets, but some thinks that it is time to move away from the traditional style, which is they find it perhaps more rigid, perhaps more difficult to follow. and maybe they do not find it that way very appropriate to express the accumulated experiences, impressions that are emanating from the present life, present ecology, present naturals, and present uh, environment. So this is one departure from the traditional style of poetry, uh, which uh, which takes departure from the traditional type of use of language, the classicality of the verse, and also the form which is metrical in the patterns. Then there's very evidenced or very clear example of the departure from the traditional poetry, that is in terms of the punctuation, capital letters, and the rhyme scheme. As I mentioned, these days in the new free verse poetry or in the emanating poetry, there's hardly any use of the half periods of the full stops or other marks, which are the punctuative marks. And use of capital letters is very rarely seen. Even in the beginning of the poetry, one may not find the capital letters anymore. And so is the rhyme scheme. So rhyme scheme, which used to be there according to the metrical patterns, that is the recurrence of certain letters, certain the words at certain period, that is not happening anymore. So look at small example of an Indian poet who is Arun Kolakar, particularly noted in the Marathi and English poetry. He, an example of his poetry is like two sisters that come, two sisters that come last when the boat nearly started. So this is a poetry. Seated side by side. So seated side is one stanza, by side is another, and then on a plank have not spoken. Hands in lap, they have been looking past the boatman's profile. So this is one style. This is quite revolutionary in rejecting the traditional style of poetry, rejecting the use of punctuative marks, and also having its own rhyme, splice, splicing the wrinkles of his saline face and loose ends of the sea. So there is no rhymic order seen to be here. Another example is his wife has diminished the waves like a queen, a band of wild acrobats. If her shuttered eyes move in dark circles, they move against her will, winds like the fingers on an archaeologist move across her stony face and across the wan edict of a smile can thereof. So there is a small metrical follow-up in the one, two, three, sixth and eighth line. So this is very casual. So this way there is no use of punctuative marks. There are no half or full periods. So this is it is there. Now poem is an open field of narrative possibilities. If we look at the traditional poetry, it is written in a very conventional style, and it doesn't have straight narratives. But if you look at the innovative poetry, which is emanating then we find that there is a huge, expressions of double meanings through the poetry. So we can see within the poetry, across the poetries, that it has become a field for narrating anything. Because as we discussed day before yesterday and yesterday, previously the poetry was revolving around nature, ecology, atmosphere, the environment, the situations, and also like we discussed sociological and so forth. But now even an industry is good content for writing a poetry. Computer is in the center of writing poetry. Machine is one very big issue in the center of writing poetry. So there are a lot of changes in the selection of contents. So the feelings, the impressions, the concerns of life, the, the achievements in life, the relationships, the kinship situations are there, of course, in the writing poetry, but now there are a lot of other there's a huge expansion of the area of the scope of choosing the contents. So that way, writing a poetry is now becoming for writing anything, for taking theme and using any type of narrative, any type of style, which is not fixed, which is a free verse style. Even it is not free verse, it is free composition. So there is, it is ending in a kind of prose poem style. So some people call it prose poem or prose poetry. So this is the case. Why it is happening, we all know. Why there are reasons for it to happen, and it is being accepted. It is being it is becoming popular also. People are reading this type of poetry. So this is called the prose poem. So this prose poem, it is a it is a small contradiction. How can prose can be poem, or how can the poem be presented in the prose form? But it is happening, and like big authors like Virginia Woolf has also spoken about it, and that this is the order of the day, because the narratives have to be expressed in such a way that they represent the real life situations. So this type of poetry is also found, and we can see that there is a movement, there is a shift from even free verse to the another style which is adopted in the Indian writings, which is the verse libre. And Indian writers, particularly Kamala Das and the Loknath Bhattacharya, can be seen, writing prose poems quite often. So if we look at their poetry, it has but it is not beyond quality, or it lacks the rhythm. No, it is there. It has a quality, and it has a rhythm, and definitely it qualifies to be titled as a prose poem. And these poems, they are a stream of consciousness. They claim their poetry, or this new poetry, which is a free verse poetry, or the prose poem, is the stream of the consciousness. Means the meaning thereby that the flow of ideas, flow of impressions is not constrained by the traditional or the rigid order of the traditional poetry, which must have metrical patterns and which must be written in a conventional style and so forth. So this stream of consciousness is something which is revealing, which is being honored also. So that means whatever comes into the poet's mind, that should be expressed without going into the structural approach or the form, traditional form or the traditional structure of the poetry. So without that there is possibility of writing a poetry, and that is becoming popular amongst the readers. So, dear learners, because I have to attend something else also very urgently at about 12:30, so I will conclude here. Maybe we will discuss certain issues in the coming sessions that we have day after tomorrow, and then for 3-4 more days we can discuss certain issues there also, because sessions will discuss primarily the project, but if need be, we will also take care of this particular block, which is the writing poetry. I would like to invite you to small discussion, maybe 2-3 points of discussion, which we can have within 5 to 10 minutes. Yes, please.
Yeah, sir, tomorrow there is no class?
Tomorrow is 21st, no? So there is a revised schedule.
Okay.
So
tomorrow no class, and day after tomorrow too?
Day after tomorrow there will be 2 classes, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So that is because tomorrow I have to attend some meeting. So we fixed day after tomorrow 2 classes. I think that has been circulated. Has it reached to all? Has that been conveyed to all?
No, sir. We haven't received any mail regarding that thing. But yes, as you have told, we will comply accordingly, sir.
Yeah. No, there was a revised email, a revised message coordinator, and I have received that mail. So probably it is there, but please note down that tomorrow we won't have any class. Day after tomorrow we will have 2 sessions, and then in the remaining 2 days also we will have 2 sessions.
Thank you, sir.
So with this, I will conclude the session. This is a little early today because I have to travel and then attend a meeting tomorrow. So we will meet again day after tomorrow, and then there will be 2 sessions to discuss the project, as well as some other issues which are there in your minds, because we didn't have much time in the previous sessions to discuss. So I will bid you say goodbye, and we will meet day after tomorrow. Thank you. And RC, I would like to conclude today early, just because I have to travel to some far off place to attend some meeting tomorrow. Thank you very much, and see you day after tomorrow. I mean, meet you day after tomorrow. Thank you.